Globalization. It's literally the framework of our entire modern era. But, if you ask 10 different experts to define it, you're going to get 10 completely different, violently opposed answers. So today, in this explainer, we're cutting right through all that academic noise using the framework of global studies professor Manfred Stager. And to do it, we're going to start with an ancient Buddhist parable.
So, the parable tells the story of a group of blind scholars who encounter an elephant for the very first time. Since they couldn't see the whole animal, they tried to understand it just by touch. One felt the trunk and was like, oh, it's a snake. Another rubbed a massive leg and called it a rough column. A third grabbed the tail and thought it was a brush. And the fourth, well, he felt the tusk and was absolutely certain it was a great spear.
Well, as you can probably guess, with their professional reputations on the line, they held firmly to their own findings, and they eventually ended up bitterly arguing over the true nature of the beast. Steger uses this exact story to hit the nail on the head regarding a major trap in modern academia. He says globalization scholars are just like these blind men. They grab onto one piece of the puzzle, hyper-focus on it, and argue with literally everyone else over what true globalization actually is.
Okay, so to avoid falling into that exact same trap, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to break things down into 1. The economic dimension, 2. The political dimension, 3. The cultural dimension, 4. The ecological dimension, 5. 3 competing ideologies, and finally 6. Seeing the whole picture.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the economic dimension. If globalization is our giant elephant, the economic dimension is definitely the trunk. It's highly visible, it's incredibly active, and honestly, it's what most of us initially picture when we hear the word. Stager defines this as the intensification and stretching of economic interrelations around the globe. We aren't just talking about, buying some goods from overseas. This is an entirely new global economic order, an unprecedented internationalization of trade and finance that is operating at absolute breakneck speed.
But this massive economic stretching doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? Stager points out 2 huge drivers pushing this whole thing forward: the rapidly changing power of transnational corporations and the enhanced role of international economic institutions. These are essentially the architects designing the framework of this global economic trunk.
Moving right along to part 2, the political dimension.
You can think of the political dimension as the powerful, structural legs of our elephant. It's what holds the whole system up. Political globalization fundamentally challenges our traditional understanding of borders. Stager breaks this down into 3 key aspects: the shifting place of the modern nation-state system, the rising necessity of global governance to manage cross-border issues, and finally, the overarching direction our global political systems are heading.
Okay, next up is part 3, the cultural dimension.
Sticking with our metaphor here, culture is kind of like the tail of the elephant, highly expressive and constantly moving. Now notice the very specific wording Stager uses here, the symbolic construction, articulation, and dissemination of meaning. This goes way, way beyond just sharing food or music or movies. This is about how we as human beings actually construct meaning in our lives and broadcast it across the entire planet.
And because we're disseminating meaning on such a massive global scale, we run into some absolutely intense debates. Like, are we developing one single uniform global culture? What exactly is the role of these immense media empires in shaping our own personal identities and desires? As we become so physically and digitally connected, do our inner lives just become homogenized?
Which brings us to part 4, the ecological dimension.
Now, this dimension, it isn't just a part of the elephant. Actually, scratch that. It's the entire physical environment that the whole beast lives, breathes, and relies on to survive. Stager groups several massive, intertwined crises under this ecological umbrella: rapid population growth and access to food, worldwide reduction in biodiversity, and of course, human-induced climate change. But crucially, this dimension really highlights the stark wealth gap between the global north and south, proving that ecological health is completely inseparable from human inequality.
All right, let's pivot a bit for part 5, 3 competing ideologies.
So, up until now, we've really just looked at what globalization is structurally. But now, we gotta look at how people project their own values onto it, what Stager calls competing globalisms. On one side, we have market globalism. This endows globalization with free market norms and neoliberal meanings. On the flip side is justice globalism. This constructs a totally alternative vision based on egalitarian ideals, global solidarity, and distributive justice. So we're looking at two totally distinct value systems being applied to the exact same global processes.
Then, we have a third framework in the mix, religious globalisms. Steger defines these as ideologies actively struggling against both market and justice globalisms. Their primary goal is really to mobilize religious values to defend against what they perceive as severe attacks from global secularism and consumerism.
And it's really worth noting here that Steger argues these aren't just, superficial political talking points. These ideologies tie into deep human imaginaries and ontologies. That basically means they dictate how massive groups of people fundamentally perceive reality, existence, and how the world is supposed to work at its most basic level.
And finally, part 6, seeing the whole picture.
So all of this brilliant complexity really illustrates exactly why understanding globalization is so incredibly difficult. The central takeaway from Steger's framework is this. When we compact globalization down into a singular process, we completely fail to see the big picture. If you only look at the economics, or you only look at the ecology, you're going to end up locked in endless clashes over which aspect is the primary domain. It's only by recognizing all four dimensions, and the ideologies mapped onto them, that we can finally start to see the whole animal.
So as you go out into the world after this explainer, whether you're reading the news, listening to debates, or just thinking about the future of our highly connected planet, I want to leave you with a question to test your own biases. When it comes to globalization, which part of the elephant are you holding on to?